Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. We are here to study the appointment of Kathleen Roussel for Director of Public Prosecutions. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here, Ms. Roussel. And I'm sure all of the members of the committee are very anxious to hear what you have to say. So we're very sorry to be a bit late, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Of course, I appreciate the importance of the budget, and so I'm not at all concerned about the delay. I think that was obviously important. It's a pleasure, of course, to meet with the committee today and to discuss my candidacy for the office of Director of Public Prosecutions. In beginning, I'd like to thank the Attorney General and the Selection Committee for the confidence that they have shown in me by sending me here today. You've obviously seen my resume, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I was born in Bécomo, Quebec, and after a few moves, my family settled in Hawkesbury, Ontario, a small town about an hour east of Ottawa. Very early on, I decided that I wanted to become a lawyer. At the time, my concept of the profession was shaped by what I saw on television and was very focused on criminal law. When I graduated from high school, I attended Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, where I completed an honors degree in religion. I subsequently moved to Ottawa to attend law school, where I was fortunate to be accepted in the French common law program. While it can't be said that I particularly enjoyed law school, I had the opportunity to work at the Student Legal Aid Clinic, which helped me confirm my interest in criminal law. I went on to practice criminal law with a small firm here in Ottawa. By pure chance, one day I was asked by a former prosecutor and now a judge if I'd be interested in work with the government. To be honest, I'd never really considered it. Being generally open to opportunity, I decided to explore it further. That led to contracting work and eventually to being hired by Justice Canada to further my legal practice in what was then called the Canadian Firearms Centre. Mon expérience au ministère de la Justice a été enrichissante.
My experience at the Department of Justice was worthwhile. I was able to perfect my knowledge in criminal law and my interest for this field. I was able to discover that I had an interest in administrative law and labor law. This was very useful to me, not only to provide legal advice to the department, but also in management whenever I'm called upon to make a decision that affects someone's interests. Over time, as a result of increasing management responsibilities, I took an interest in financial matters and in other management functions not usually found in a legal job description. In my functions as Deputy Director of the Public Prosecution Service, I was placed in a role where I would be called on to manage law as well as a number of corporate services. I believe these experiences prepared me well for the role of Director of Public Prosecutions.
Serves a dual function, Deputy Attorney General and Deputy Head of a small department. As Deputy Attorney General, the DPP needs to have a sound understanding of criminal law and ensure that the organization meets its obligations to the Attorney General and to the general public. The DPP needs to be able to provide clear guidelines to prosecutors that guide their exercise of discretion and allow the Attorney General to be notified of prosecutions that raise issues of general interest in sufficient time for her to react. The DPP, as Deputy Attorney General, also needs to be a good ambassador and has an important outreach role with provincial colleagues and other justice participants in Canada and abroad. As Deputy Head, the DPP has an equally important role. He or she must manage the PPSC in a fiscally responsible manner while ensuring the well-being of PPSC employees. I believe I can acquit myself of both the functions of the DPP and look forward to your questions. Merci.
Thank you very much, Ms. Roussel. On apprécie beaucoup votre témoignage. And
We appreciate your testimony.
move to questions. I just want to explain to those watching at home how Ms. Roussel was selected as the candidate that's appearing before this committee. There is a process set out in Section 4.1 of the Director of Public Prosecutions Act that sets out a statutory selection committee, which is comprised of a representative of the Federation of Law Societies of Canada, representatives of each recognized party in the House of Commons, the Deputy Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, the Deputy Minister of Justice and Deputy Attorney General, and a person selected by the Minister of Justice and Attorney General. As part of the selection process, Ms. Roussel underwent 2 interviews, one with the pre-selection committee and one with the statutory selection committee. an evaluation of second language skills, reference checks, and so we're sort of the final step in the process, and just wanted Canadians to know that. So we're going to move to questions, and we're going to start with the Conservatives. Mr. Nicholson?
Very much, and thank you, Ms. Roussel, for being here today, and congratulations on moving forward through this process. There's a lot of challenges, as you know, we have in the criminal justice system. It's in the newspaper every day. You may have noticed, I'm sure you did notice, that in the last budget there was additional funds for more federal judges to be appointed, and one of the things I've said, I'd like to see just more judges filling the spaces that are right now, but in addition to that there are, but I didn't see any provision for additional prosecutors, and don't you think that would be have been a good idea? I mean, I know you have to be careful if you're talking about budgets and what governments do, but what would you do? It seems to me that they would go hand in hand, more judges to hear these. Presumably we need more federal prosecutors, but I didn't see that in the budget.
Certainly I would say that at the moment we have sufficient staff in order to meet our obligations. I think that the addition of judges is something that we're going to have to keep an eye on. As new judges are appointed, it may have an impact on the resource requirements of the public prosecution service, particularly if there are more courts sitting. I think it's far too early for us to judge that. I would add that in terms of our workload, we just looked at recent numbers, and our workload is not increasing. So presuming our workload remains steady, the addition of extra judges may not actually make a difference for us. It's really just organizing ourselves to make sure that we're covering all of the courts. And I would say that for the time being, we have sufficient staff to do that. Obviously, it's something that we assess on a regular basis, at least annually.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I'm hoping that if in fact you find that there is some sort of a shortage here, I'm hoping that somewhere along the line that we get informed of that. You want to have the very best people in your department, and one of the things that we have noticed over the last number of years is that there's been a discrepancy now between what provincial prosecutors are being paid and what is being paid at the federal level, and I think there are examples in British Columbia and other jurisdictions where people are leaving the federal prosecution to sign up with the provincial prosecution. I mean, I wonder if you could tell me, is this a concern of yours, and what do you think we can or should be doing about this? Because ultimately people have a career that they have to manage, and if they're getting considerably more resources, as interesting and fascinating as this job is, and I think it is, it's important for federal prosecutors, and I've heard from them that they do like the work, but somewhere along the line, you know, we've got to make sure that we pay these individuals and a proper wage and comparable to certainly their provincial counterparts. What's your thoughts?
I'm going to start by just letting you know where we are in terms of collective bargaining. You will, of course, all know that what we pay our prosecutors is not up to me. It's a function of the Treasury Board to negotiate collective bargaining agreements. And at the moment, we will be going to binding conciliation with the Association of Justice Council. And as an employer of lawyers, obviously, I hope for good results and happy staff. In terms of discrepancy, it's not across the board. There are variations between the various provincial prosecution services. There have been times where we have seen some exodus in small pockets to prosecution services elsewhere, and we've also occasionally seen the reverse, where we have been easily able to recruit experienced prosecutors from provinces. So there's a fair amount of exchange. What I can do as a manager, given that I don't control things like the collective bargaining agreement, is make sure that we're offering the lawyers good work and that we're recognized as an employer of choice. We started to look at new recruitment methods to brand the PPSC. One of the issues that some of you will know we're 10 years old as an organization, and there's still a lot of confusion between the Public Prosecution Service and Justice Canada, and we've embarked on an exercise where we're trying to define ourselves and our work so that it's obvious to young people coming from law school, but also experienced lawyers from private practice and provincial prosecution services, so that there's a real identity when they're coming to the PPSC. So some of it is not just how much you pay. I think some of it is really being recognized as an employer of choice who provides good work, training opportunities, and a collegial environment to work in.
One of the things that has been put forward in just a couple of years ago in a report is that the mental health of the employees that we have has to be a priority, and I know that was 2 years ago now. I wonder if you could outline for us the priority that you attach to that, and your thoughts in general about maintaining and assisting those who have challenges in this area.
We actually had a discussion at the management table about that today. In the last few years, we had put a real emphasis on training all of our staff on prevention of harassment in the workplace, because if you follow the employee surveys, it comes up as a theme every year. And the training was a joint endeavor with the bargaining agents, and it was extremely successful. There's a very similar model for training in mental health. That's a joint endeavor between the employer and the unions, and we're looking at training trainers to participate in that. Every manager this year has in their performance agreement something about furthering mental health in the workplace. In particularly vulnerable practices, and I would say certainly up north, we also have put a lot of emphasis on training and I think avoidance of mental health issues. We provide things like vicarious trauma counseling to our staff who deal with very violent very violent prosecutions and deal with vulnerable victims. So there's already a good kernel of work, but we're going to put a push on that in the next few years, now that we feel that we have trained almost all of our staff on anti-harassment. That really is our next step. And in some offices, we've already started doing some training on mental health and awareness. Thank you.
Very much. We're going to go to Mr. Fraser now.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci beaucoup, Madame Roussel, pour être ici.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Ms. Roussel. Congratulations on your nomination.
The Director of Public Prosecutions for a few months now. Can you give me some sense of what a typical week would look like in your role as Director of Public Prosecutions?
I've been acting since, I believe, March 7th of this year, so it is a few months now. It has flown by. I think a typical week of an administrator in any department involves a lot of meetings, so I think that's the first thing you would see in my calendar. Every week I receive a number of meetings from the managers of various sections. We have regular management meetings that are weekly in my calendar. There are legal questions that bubble up at least weekly. There are certain functions that are reserved to the Director of Public Prosecutions. For example, signing direct indictments, and we have seen more of those since the Jordan decision. So I'm certainly entertaining those on a very regular basis. Notes to the Attorney General informing her of issues of general interest will come to me at least once a week, sometimes more often, depending what is happening before the courts that week. So really, my work is a real amalgamation of dealing with a legal question here and a management issue over there. The issues might be different every week, but I think the mix stays more or less the same, and I would say probably is 50-50 between management of law and management of corporate functions.
And as I understand it by legislation, as the Director of Public Prosecutions, you are the Deputy Attorney General, and acting independently as the Director of Public Prosecutions. How do you balance being Deputy Attorney General with your role as an independent Director of Public Prosecutions?
Well, the statute essentially set up the position of the Director of Public Prosecutions in order to make clear the independence of the function. And arguably, for those of us who remember when the prosecution service was part of justice, there was functional independence that was being exercised, but it wasn't perhaps as apparent to the public. In terms of independence, the statute has really set out the scheme by which the Attorney General is kept informed of issues of general interest, but unless she chooses to intervene, the final decisions in how to bring matters forward and the guidance to give prosecutors is mine. So in terms of assuring the independence, I think that the statute has set that up quite nicely, and in practice it's not an issue that arises very often.
C'est évident, Madame Roussel, que vous êtes complètement bilingue.
Well, it's obvious, Ms. Roussel, that you're completely bilingual in both of our official languages, both English and French. Do you routinely use English and French? Well, sometimes even in the same sentence. Yes, all the meetings for the departmental meetings are bilingual. And of course, I'm wearing two hats right now. I'm still the deputy director and in an interim fashion, the director. So we have staff also that works with us in Montreal and elsewhere. I use English and French every day, pretty much on a 50-50 basis. Thank you. That was my question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Roussel, for appearing before the committee today. I wanted to follow up where Mr. Nicholson left off, because I think there are some interesting threads that he picked up on that I kind of want to weave together in a worst-case scenario, because you will be the manager, and I want to know how you're going to handle what I see as an upcoming problem. So it does center on the Jordan decision, the fact that we do have those hard timelines, which I think given the complexity of some of the federal cases, is going to really increase the workload for our federal prosecutors. We already know that their counterparts in provincial governments, the pay is significantly better in some cases. And we also know that some provinces have increased their budgets to hire new prosecutors to deal with the Jordan decision. And of course, and when I think about mental health, I'm thinking not really on harassment, but on burnout.
Yes.
The stress from being overworked. So I just want to know, like, if I paint the worst case scenario where we have judicial appointments cherry picking out of the Public Prosecution Service, if we have people from the Public Prosecution Service of Canada fleeing to the provinces because of better pay, and they are actively hiring people, and the remaining pool is suffering from that burnout, first from losing their colleagues and having to deal with more. I know you don't have any control over budgetary matters, but you as a manager are going to have to tie all of these threads together. And I just want to know, does this concern you, first of all? And what kind of a plan, a contingency plan, would you develop as the top manager to effectively deal with it?
Well, let me start by saying that as a manager, and you know, I've managed people now for the better part of 15 years, you're always concerned about how your staff are doing. You're concerned about burnout, and I think in our profession, there are a lot of signs of burnout and mental health issues and warning signs. It's not just us. The law societies, I think, have done quite a good job of putting up the alert flag and trying to offer assistance. Now, we're fortunate in the federal government that there's a lot of assistance available to us. I think to some extent I have to rely a great deal on my regional managers, who are the day-to-day managers of our prosecutors in the regions, because they really have to look for signs, and they have to make sure that they're telling us when they don't have the resources that they need. I can tell you that we keep a very close eye on a very regular basis in terms of staffing levels. I could tell you almost at any given moment where we are in any particular region. If there is a sudden departure, we're usually well aware of it. We have regular meetings with each of our regional managers. So, I've not come here asking for resources, because at the moment I think we're managing, but I certainly can tell you that I wouldn't hesitate to go to the Attorney General to discuss resources if I felt that they were required. You're right in the sense that the profession generally, and I think, and it's not just us, I think it's judges defense counsel and prosecutors, whether they're federal or provincial, are feeling a lot of pressure because of Jordan. And it may very well set up some sort of a, at least while we're dealing with transitional cases, a bubble effect where I think there's pressure felt throughout the system. And the reality of that is you have to work through it, not just one case at a time, but I think one courthouse at the time. It takes a lot of collaboration between the various justice participants, and I'm satisfied that there are good discussions going on between the justice participants, probably better than we've seen in many years. Now, as just to answer your general question, certainly as a manager, I'm always concerned, and I think you always have to be questioning, are people okay and do they have what they need? And sometimes it's not more people, but it's people with the right resources. One of the problems I think that we're all aware of in criminal courts is that in some ways criminal law is still practiced as if we were in the 1900s. There's still a lot of people walking around with the criminal code in one hand and a banker's boxes of files in the other. And so I think some of what Jordan will cause us to do beyond just trying to manage cases from the get-go on delay is have real discussions with justice participants about how we evolve the manner in which we present cases so that they run more efficiently through the system. So it's not just the number of people. I think some of it is really discussing for all of the justice participants the tools and how we get there together.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I want to make sure that our public prosecution service most certainly does have the resources that it needs, and I'm glad to see that you're aware of these concerns, as are we as parliamentarians, and hopefully because we saw the 2017 budget devote $55 million over 5 years to create those judicial positions, certainly maybe the government can listen to this testimony and realize that maybe additional requirements can be met financially. Just a quick question for the end here. Your predecessor, Brian Saunders, when he appeared before the Justice Committee in March of last year, made a comment that he'd heard from prosecutors that sometimes the courts are questioning why we are proceeding with cases against simple marijuana possession, given that the government has announced its intention to legalize. I was just wondering, in your time in the Public Prosecution Service of Canada, have you heard similar concerns raised as a deputy?
Let's keep in mind that I overlapped with Brian Saunders for 4 years, yeah. So what he heard, I heard. Yeah. And I think the case he referred to was actually in one of my regions where a judge had refused to take a guilty plea on a simple possession on the basis that he didn't want to be the last judge in Canada to sentence somebody on marijuana possession. Oddly enough, despite the tabling of the bill, we've not been hearing that as of late. We've not been getting much in the way of resistance from the judiciary. Certainly from our standpoint, it's not for us to decide whether a bill will pass or not. So we are continuing to prosecute cases. I will say that when we're dealing with small amounts, obviously prosecutors will use their discretion based on what they know of the accused and the circumstances of the offense. There are, for example, diversion programs that can be looked at when you're dealing with a first-time offender, and I'm satisfied that prosecutors are exercising discretion appropriately.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Khalid?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair, and it's an honor to have you here today. Thank you for your time. You had touched on this briefly, and we have spent many weeks on looking at access to justice, and one of the issues that keeps arising is the delay, the delay to access to justice. I understand that you've indicated in your annual report a new prosecution-specific case management system. Can you describe what that is, and if that will help in creating more efficiencies in the justice system?
You're really in my bailiwick, because in my spare time I love to have good information, and good information to me comes from a good case management system. We've been using a case management system that Justice Canada years ago developed for itself called iCase. iCase is very much at the end of its life, and we've started a project to replace it by something that I'm sure we'll give it a spiffier name at some point, but it's a legal case management system. We're basically trying to make sure that we're able to pull useful information about our cases when we need it. And we want a system that is somewhat more intuitive for prosecutors to use. It will not add efficiency outside of the PPSC, but certainly within the PPSC, and for me as a manager, it'll be much easier to give you just-in-time kind of information about how many marijuana possession cases we have, the ultimate disposition of them, how long they took to get from date of charge to the date of disposal. Right now, while we can get that information, it's quite painstaking, and each time we're writing scripts to get the information out of the system. So we're trying to build a system that will allow us to have regular reports on what I would call business intelligence information that's useful for us.
Also, as part of your role, I understand that you will be working closely with our provincial counterparts, provincial and territorial counterparts. Can you describe a little bit about your priorities in your work with the provinces and territories as well?
I co-chair the something called the Heads of Prosecution Committee, and it's a committee that brings together the head of every prosecution service in Canada, provincial ourselves, as well as the military prosecution service. We get together and discuss issues of common interest. We have very frank exchanges on issues that are particular to our services that impact things like recruitment and retention. So while the information is in camera, I know where there may be some issues with recruitment and retention in Canada because we're very open with each other, and it does allow us, I think, to have an exchange on things that worked. At our last meeting, which was in April of this year, April or May, we actually spent most of an afternoon on Jordan because we think that that's the sort of thing where exchanging best practices is vitally important to us. So at every meeting there are exchanges about updates about what's going on in each prosecution service, but also there are usually 2 or 3 sessions on best practices. We also will have discussions on occasion on evidentiary issues of common interest, development of jurisprudence. The meeting is essentially pretty much in camera, and because it does have, we want to make sure that there is full and frank exchange. I think every member of that committee would tell you that they come back from every meeting with good ideas. The other benefit to it, if I'm being honest, is all of us in our prosecution services will at times have cases that we can't take, usually because of a conflict. So, for example, the brother of one of our lawyers is charged, and by having those contacts, you're able to easily pick up the phone and ask for help from the provincial prosecution service. So it has some side benefits that is just basically relationship building in the most basic sense.
Thank you. To turn inwards a little bit, the PPSC, your employment equity standards are actually really good. Your targets to employ women and Indigenous communities, as well as people with disabilities, are very commendable. I'm wondering why there seems to be a little bit of a lagging for employment of visible minorities, which is a little bit lower than what the general labor one is. If you could explain that, and if you can also explain how you intend to improve that, if at all.
We are lagging behind in a few things, and some of them the numbers don't show, and I'll give you a concrete example in a minute. That is something that I'm committed to working on. Certainly we're lagging behind on visible minorities, and I think slightly on persons with disabilities. We know that we have to consider it at this point because we're behind on every hiring. And so one of the things that we have done is we've put in every one of our managers' agreements a clause by which they are required, and we'll assess them on it at the end of the year, to make those put those considerations at the forefront in our staffing actions. I think that may not be enough, if I'm being honest, and I have asked our human resources folks to look at other strategies to basically make sure that we are attractive to those communities, because sometimes that's the problem. And it does come back, I think, to branding and what we can offer people as a career in the federal public service. Now, where the numbers are not visible, but where it is of concern to me, while we have no difficulty attracting female prosecutors, when you look at our demographics, the higher up you go in our levels of prosecutors, at our senior level, the women are greatly underrepresented. That's of extreme concern, I think, to my entire management team, not just to me. And we have asked our Employment and Equity and Diversity Committee to do a special study to find out where the barriers are, because we noticed not only that women were not getting the promotions, we noticed they weren't applying for the promotions. We've now finished a survey, and I'm expecting the results in the next few weeks, and that ought to help us develop an action plan. So, you know, the numbers are very instructive, but to us, we try to go beyond the numbers to see, are there actual other gaps that would not be visible? Because when you look at our demographics, we have more than 50% of female prosecutors, but you get to, in the higher levels, you're getting below, I think, 30%.
Thank you very much. So we've completed our first round of questions. Is there any member of the committee that feels they have a question that they would like to ask a short question, or are we good with the questions? So that being said, Mr. Cooper? Yes, of course.
Thank you, Ms. Roussel, for being here today. I just wanted to follow up, or maybe dig down a little further into some of the comments that you made earlier around hiring the best candidates possible. You indicated that the PPSC has undertaken new hiring methods. Could you perhaps elaborate a little bit about what those are, and are they yielding the results? And to that end, I heard you say just at the end of a question to Ms. Khalid that the PPSC is currently behind in all areas of hiring. Did I hear you correct in that regard, or was that in the specific context of recruiting women and other visible minorities?
It was in that specific context. Otherwise, we're not having generally across the board difficulties with recruitment, except I would say in certain areas of the country, and you can appreciate that recruiting a senior lawyer to work in Nunavut is quite difficult. And so in some areas, we've taken on an exercise where we really are trying to not just sell the PPSC, but sell the work environment and sell the community in which the lawyers would be practicing. So we started to experiment with it. This is a new undertaking that we decided to launch into at our managers meeting last fall. So it's quite new. But I think we want to make sure when we are going out to try to recruit young lawyers, but also experienced lawyers, that we're able to properly explain to them the mandate and the exciting work of the PPSC, as well as the role in the justice system, which I think is quite important, and I think sometimes we undersell the importance of the work. So we refer to that as branding. So we're trying to really brand ourselves as an employer of choice, based in large part upon the kind of work we're doing, but also sometimes on the environment in which people would be working. We've also started to look at developing our own articling program. In many regions, we still are partnering with Justice Canada, and that's not a bad thing. It's actually served us quite well. But in some of our larger centres, we think that we would be able to recruit articling students who, rather than doing a rotation with us, would spend the year with us. And in places like Old City Hall in Toronto, which is the busiest court in Canada, I believe, it's quite crucial for us. The other thing I would say is 4 years ago, we developed something called the Federal FPDP, Federal Prosecutor Development Program, which is a very novel program. I don't believe that any of my provincial colleagues have it, which when we hire a young lawyer, we set out for them a program of learning that will then have them move from the hiring level into what we call our working level, and that comes with a substantial raise. And we can move lawyers through that in usually 3 to 4 years. And the reason it's different is that we do it without any competition. Once we decide that you've met the competencies required for our working level, you're simply promoted without having to compete for a new job. So we have a number of programs. The branding is much newer. And I think in a year from now, when I'm back here for main estimates or something else, presuming I am back here after today, then I'll be in a position to tell you how that went.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, do I have an agreement of the committee for us to go in camera to consider the appointments and hopefully make a decision? And at that point, Ms. Roussel, thank you very much for having come before us and talked to us. And I don't want to preempt myself by saying we look forward to working with you in the future, but I'm sure we do.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you. So I just ask, we're going to go into in camera, so if everyone who's not supposed to be here would kindly leave the room as quickly as possible, it would be very much appreciated. So we're going to suspend the meeting now for a couple of minutes.